Your heating breaks for one night and you complain for a week. Now imagine that instead of one bad night, it's every single night for 20,000 years in a row. No furnace, no walls, no blanket thicker than an animal's skin, and outside, a version of the planet so cold it would kill you in under an hour if you stepped out unprepared. That wasn't a disaster our ancestors survived once. That was simply what Tuesday looked like for roughly 100,000 years. And here's the part that should actually bother you. If you swapped places with them tonight, same body, same brain, all your modern knowledge intact, you would probably not make it a week. Not because you're not smart enough. Because knowing things and surviving with your bare hands are two completely different skills, and almost none of us still have the second one. Let's set the actual scale of this first, because most people badly underestimate it. At the peak of the last ice age, roughly 20,000 years ago, ice sheets more than a mile thick buried huge parts of North America, Europe, and Asia. Sea levels dropped over 300 feet because so much of the planet's water was frozen solid into glaciers. And humans, a species that evolved under the African sun, with no fur, no blubber, and skin built for shedding heat, not keeping it, were living through winters that modern Siberia would recognize as familiar. Every single thing that kept a person alive that winter had to be built, hunted, or torn from something else's body, because the human body itself brought almost nothing to the fight. Which brings us to the first true survival tactic, and it starts with wearing the dead. Ancient humans figured out fast that their own skin was worthless in this cold, so they took someone else's. Animal hide became the only thing standing between a person and hypothermia. And it wasn't always some harmless grazing animal. Archaeological evidence shows that for hundreds of thousands of years, humans were working with bear hide specifically. Which means before you could wear it, you had to get it off an animal that was very capable of killing you first. For most of that time, this clothing was crude. Loose skins draped and tied around the body. Functional, barely. Warm, sort of. Comfortable, never. And comfort wasn't even the goal, because at these temperatures, exposed skin doesn't just ache, it starts to die. Frostbite would have been a routine injury. Blackened fingers, lost toes, no hospitals, no antibiotics, no do-overs. Then, somewhere around 30,000 to 40,000 years ago, something tiny changed everything. The eyed needle, carved from bone or ivory, small enough to fit inside a closed fist. This single object may be one of the most underrated inventions in the history of our species. With a needle, people stopped draping hides and started tailoring them, cutting, fitting, layering multiple pieces to trap warm air against the body the way modern winter gear still does. Recent excavations in Wyoming at a 13,000-year-old site called La Prelle found dozens of these needles made from the bones of foxes, bobcats, and even the now extinct American cheetah, proof that this technology had spread and specialized across an entire continent. That needle didn't just make people warmer. It's part of the reason humans could push into landscapes that would have been flatly uninhabitable without it. But clothing wasn't free. Every coat meant another dead animal and hours of someone kneeling in freezing wind, scraping a hide clean with a stone blade while their own fingers went numb doing it. Now here's where the story gets genuinely strange. The shelters. In huge stretches of the Ice Age landscape, there was no forest for timber and no convenient cave to crawl into. So people built with the only large material the environment actually offered them: bone. Specifically, mammoth bone. Across Eastern Europe, archaeologists have uncovered structures built from mammoth skulls, ribs, and tusks. Not scattered wreckage, but deliberately arranged circular dwellings, sometimes built from the remains of dozens of animals, then packed with hide and earth to block the wind. Researchers are still debating exactly what some of these structures were used for: a full-time home, seasonal shelter, or even storage. But the fact remains, entire buildings engineered from skeletons. Picture actually sleeping inside one, wind screaming outside, snow stacking against bone walls, and the only thing between you and freezing to death is the frame of an animal that once weighed several tons. For an Ice Age human, that wasn't nightmare fuel. That was simply where you lived. But the strangest theory in this whole story isn't about what people built. It's about what their own bodies might have done. at a site in northern Spain called Cima de los Huesos. The Pit of Bones, researchers studying roughly 400,000-year-old remains found something odd. Seasonal growth interruptions in the bone tissue, patterns that closely resemble the skeletal signs seen in animals that hibernate. In 2020, two researchers published a genuinely controversial hypothesis that these ancient humans may have entered something like a hibernation-adjacent state during the harshest months. Not full bear-style hibernation, but a dramatic slowdown in metabolism to conserve calories through a winter with almost nothing to eat. It is not accepted science. Multiple researchers have pushed back hard, pointing out that the same bone patterns could come from something as mundane as chronic seasonal malnutrition, and that living cold climate populations today, like the Inuit, don't hibernate at all. They survive on an extremely fat-rich diet instead. But the fact that serious researchers are even debating this tells you something on its own. Ice Age winters may have been brutal enough that scientists aren't willing to rule out our bodies doing something almost unrecognizable to survive them. And then there's the outcome nobody likes to sit with. Not everyone made it through. As the Ice Age ground on, our closest relatives, the Neanderthals, vanished. These weren't unprepared newcomers. Neanderthals had been adapting to cold European climates for several 100,000 years, arguably longer and more thoroughly than our own ancestors had. In several ways, their bodies were better built for the cold than ours were, and they still disappeared. Climate swings, shrinking prey populations, and competition for shrinking resources likely combined to push their numbers past the point of recovery. One entire branch of the human family tree went extinct. Ours didn't. Scientists still argue over exactly why: better tools, wider social networks, sheer chance, or some combination nobody's fully untangled yet. But the result is not in dispute. Only one human lineage walked out the other side of that ice age. So how did our specific ancestors make it through conditions severe enough to end an entire other species of human? The honest answer isn't a clever gadget, it's cooperation. Archaeologists keep finding tools, ornaments, and raw materials hundreds of miles from where they originally came from, in some of the harshest, most resource-starved environments on the planet. That only happens if separate human groups stayed connected across serious distances, trading, sharing information, marrying across bands, and, this part matters most, helping each other when one group's local situation collapsed. In a world this hostile, kindness wasn't really a virtue. It was survival infrastructure. If cooperation broke down, the whole group's odds broke down with it. It may honestly be the single greatest survival technology humans ever developed. And unlike the needle or the bone hut, it doesn't show up cleanly in the archaeological record. You have to infer it from just how far a single foxbone needle traveled from home. Put all of it together, and the picture that emerges isn't really one of clever invention arriving neatly on schedule. It's closer to desperation that got dressed up as ingenuity after the fact. Wearing the skin of something that could have killed you because your own skin was useless. Building a house from the skeleton of an animal weighing several tons because there was nothing else standing in the landscape. Possibly pushing the human body towards something we still don't fully understand, just to make it to spring. And watching an entire sibling species of human vanish from the planet while yours somehow kept going. We like to picture our ancestors as primitive. Survival at this level required something closer to brutal, unglamorous genius. Every invention, every alliance, every strange adaptation built directly on top of hunger, frostbite, and fear, refined generation after generation by the simple fact that the people who got it wrong didn't get to pass anything on. So tonight, when the temperature drops and you reach for a blanket and still find something to complain about, it's worth remembering this. Your ancestors survived winters severe enough to erase an entire other kind of human being. They wore the dead. They slept inside skeletons. They may have altered their own metabolism just to outlast a season with nothing to eat. You're warm tonight not because humans were built to handle the cold. Biologically, we were embarrassingly unequipped for it. You're warm because generation after generation, they simply refused to stop, long enough to hand that refusal down to you.